What do you get if you cross a vampire with a snowman? Of course, frostbite. Be sure to subscribe to my channel. He was always so polite. That was the first thing I noticed about him. The second was how well he tipped. Preston had a few strange quirks, though. Roughly every hour or so he would duck into the bathroom to put on lotion. And for the longest time, he wore sunglasses constantly. Said he was sensitive to light. It made sense to me. He never showed up before sundown. Then one time he took them off to clean them. Some juice had splashed on the lenses. I only saw his eyes for a second, but he had one green and one brown eye. I pointed this out to him, saying how interesting I thought it was. He just smiled, shades back on, and said, "I don't think so. Perhaps I just caught some odd lighting." Figured he was just embarrassed about it, so I didn't pry. Regulars like Preston were the lifeblood of a bar like ours. On average, I liked the clientele more than anywhere else I'd worked. No one hitting on me or trying to look up my skirt was nice. But Preston I particularly liked. He didn't have an obnoxious bone in his body, content to listen and watch. Despite that, he was the kind of person people wanted to listen to. His voice carried more weight than his skin and bone frame could have. I couldn't peg how old he was. He had one of those faces. But he dressed with a sophistication that suggested a bit of age. It was sharp, even among a crowd that had an impressive fashion sense. I'm sure Preston could have had just about anyone in the bar, maybe even me, not that he would have been interested, and yet I rarely saw him go home with anyone. Which is why I was happy the night Sam waltzed over to the bar and, with his typical forwardness, took a sip from Preston's drink. "You should ask first," was all Preston said. "You should ask me for my number," Sam snapped back. Without another word, he grabbed Preston's hand and began to write on the palm. Preston yanked his arm back, and for the first time in the year that I'd known him, I saw the anger on his face. "That's permanent marker," yelled Preston. "Oh, relax, Corey Hart. Your skin will clean itself off in a couple of days." "No, it won't. I'm going to go play with somebody else, now." Jolie put Preston's next drink on my tab as consolation for disfiguring him. For the next 5 weeks, Preston wore gloves. I made sure to respect his personal space after that, and everything was fine. Until Henry's amputation celebration. Henry had lost the use of his left leg in Vietnam decades earlier, but for some reason, it was finally time to remove it. A party seemed morbid, but it wasn't my leg. Henry was the center of attention that night, not paying for a single drink. I overheard Preston mention something about also being in arm, and the pair downed a shot. "Sure you should be drinking so much the night before surgery, Harry? I have to walk into a room knowing they're gonna chop my leg off. You expect me to do it sober? I'm gonna hit the head. Anyone offers to buy me anything, make sure it has tequila in it." After Henry and his husband left, Preston leaned in. "Do you mind if I ask what's wrong with Mr. Henry's leg?" "I think nerve damage," I said. "So nothing is wrong with the knee? The bones? The foot?" I don't think so." "What about his financial situation? Is he well off?" "Not particularly." "Why do you want to know?" "Oh, nothing you need to worry about." Obviously, I found the questions disturbing. Especially once Preston pulled Henry and his spouse aside for a long, private conversation. My mind swam with possibilities. I prayed it wasn't a sex thing. Then I thought about how secretive Preston was about his job and how free he was with his money, always cash. Maybe he was involved with the mob and had some criminal use for a body part. If so, it was none of my business and I didn't want it to be. It was only a couple months later that we grew pretty close. I'd finally had enough and kicked my boyfriend out. But he wasn't moving on. It started with incessant calls, unannounced visits to our former home. Threats, even. I finally got a restraining order which he ignored. One time, my ex came to my work. After a big scene, the bouncer threw him out on his ass. I was pretty rattled all night, and Preston came up to me. "Are you alright?" he asked. "Not really." "Is there anything I can do?" I nearly give the typical, "No, but thank you," response, but I felt like he was genuine. And I remembered his line of work. At least, what I thought it was. "What sort of things do you mean?" "I can take care of it for you. I don't have a lot of money. No charge. All I would need is your approval." I was a mixture of stunned, grateful, and scared. All I could think to say was, he needs to be scared off, I know that. I don't want him dead. I don't even want him hurt too bad to walk away after. I just want him to stop. Stop stalking me. Stop leering at me, you know? That is what you want? After a pause, I nodded. Preston finished his drink, sat down a 20, then walked out the door. "Wait." I yelled after, but it was too late. I never heard from my ex again after that. And the next night, Preston wasn't wearing sunglasses. His eyes seemed a little familiar, and both were the same color. I figured I'd been wrong about his condition earlier, and complimented his new look. We started to see a lot of each other. Occasionally outside of work, even. But always at night. It wasn't until the incident with Franklin, the dishwasher, that I figured out the truth about Preston. Or as good a guess as possible, at least. A customer I hadn't seen before came up to me fuming. "Two men are in your bathroom doing unspeakable shit." I rolled my eyes at the stupidity of my patrons. They're just going at it in plain view? They're in a stall, they didn't know I saw them but the door was cracked and, well, one of them is hurting the other. It's ruined my night. I comped his tab and headed into the restroom myself. Sam, sure, that would have been in character. Sex in the stalls happened, too. But I certainly didn't expect what I saw after I opened the door the rest of the way to tell them to knock it off. It was Preston and a pretty boy in his mid-20s. Everyone was dressed, but Preston was drinking from the dude. His blood. As soon as they noticed me, the guy I didn't know shoved Preston back and sprinted out. Preston shouted as his hand rammed into the wall. "Who the fuck was that?" I yelled. "A man I have an arrangement with. We've done it before, he knows what he..." I don't care how willing he was. You can't do that. Normally, I don't care what people are into, okay? But with everything going on these days and holy shit, in my club, I am beyond sorry. How can I make it up to you? As angry as I was at him, I was angry for him. Concerned, you know? You've done more than enough for me, Preston, that isn't the issue. Just promise me you'll stop this fuckery and get tested. There is no need for me to take any sort of test, but I promise I will do no such thing in your place of business again. Now, I should see to this. He held up a hand, and his ring finger was broken. Fuck, Preston. Let me see that. But he wouldn't let me help and rushed out. The next day, I got a phone call from Franklin, the dishwasher. He'd been in some sort of car accident and was in the hospital. It wasn't life-threatening, but he'd be out for a few days. No visitors, Frank said. I still sent him a care package. 3 days later, I saw Preston again. I asked about his finger, which I swear had been bent back 150 degrees, and he held up his perfectly intact hand. It looked far worse than it was. Frank showed up the next night in the brand new car, bragging about all the money he'd got in a quick settlement with a trucking company. And all it had cost him was his left ring finger. I put a bit of distance between myself and Preston after that, and the last time I'd see him would only be 2 months later. That night, Sam walked up to the bar without his usual swagger. He rung the bell, then declared he was buying a round for everyone. The bar started to cheer until they saw his face. Turned out, Sam had at most 2 months to live. It wasn't what I expected. No, it was brain cancer. We all commiserated. There were tears, hugs, group prayers, New Age healing rituals, the works. Late into the night, Sam and Preston started talking. Preston asked if it was only his brain that was damaged, offered his condolences, said what a bitch it was, only time I'd heard him swear. Then Sam cracked. Why should I have to die that way? There were so many easier ways. Are you considering enacting them? Asked Preston. I wish. I really wish I could. And of course I haven't been part of the church in a long time, but there are lines even a lapsed Catholic won't cross, you know? You fear hell? Damn right I fear hell. And if you let yourself be murdered? Would that damn you, as well? Sam's eyes went wide, and he and Preston took their conversation to a private corner. After the pair paid their tabs and left, I tried to put Sam's bill on the house, but he was having none of it. I never saw them again. At least, not in the typical sense. Less than 3 weeks passed before the cops showed up at my bar. They had a few questions about Sam and Preston, but the case seemed pretty open and shut. Apparently, human remains had washed up at the base of a nearby waterfall. Forensics learned it was 2 bodies, though neither was intact. Rather, it was bits and pieces of each. They were eventually DNA identified as Sam and Preston, both having been reported missing. Sam's motive for the duo suicide was obvious, Preston's was undetermined, but that was that. I didn't tell the police my suspicions. Of course, I was sad for both of them, but I was in for a nice surprise. In his will, Preston had left me his house. It was nice, homey, not too ostentatious, and paid for. I already had a house, but it was still a windfall. For months I'd been reinvesting my wages and tips into the struggling bar, so this was a lifesaver. I couldn't bring myself to sell it, so I rented it out. Still, I'm renting it. The final shock came the day the deed transferred to my name and I went to see the place. Standing at the doorway was Preston. Well, not exactly Preston, but I knew it was him. He wore a trench coat and a wide-brimmed hat, and under all that, his features were a bizarre mix of the man I knew and Sam's, but I'm sure it looked normal enough to everyone else. "May I come in?" he asked in a stranger's voice, but with Preston's tempo. "It's your house." "Not anymore." I opened the door and lead him inside. "I didn't know you could come out at the sun," I said. "The only thing about the sun which I fear is skin damage. The skin's hard to come by." "I see, I should thank you for the house." "Oh, it was the only mine because I inherited it myself, in a sense. Better to make a clean break before I start again." "You're leaving town?" He nodded. "I have considered Belgium. You were my favorite this time around, though. Thank you for your friendship." Before you go, you have questions. It would be best for me not to answer. I sighed, half expecting that response. You are not afraid of me, are you? Asked Preston, with a rare hint of emotion. No, I told him honestly. Besides, I'm not a total idiot. I know you can't take anything without permission. He laughed loudly, then apologized, before saying, that is not true, at all. Then why all the effort to get consent? Because, my dear, that would be rude.